Well, that's fantastic. Hey, my name is Caleb, if I haven't met you, and I'm a friend of Rob's, and I appreciate him and the leadership of this church, friend of Ray's, and appreciate him leading worship. And I love your church. I love Pastor Glenn and just the foundation that he set here and that he's still here, and so many great things happening here. And I love the life hacks too. Although, if you ever see me camping, you know that I'm either on a mission trip or a horrible natural disaster has occurred. Because my idea of camping is Holiday Inn. That's just me. Some of you are not like that, and I'm just going to own it right here. And we've been in this series called Life Hacks, where we've been taking a look at a portion of the Sermon on the Mount, just really seeing how we can amp up our spiritual life and what we can do to grow closer with God as we go into this fall season, because you guys have got an incredible, exciting fall ahead of you, and I cannot wait to see what God does in this church this fall and next year and the following year. Great things are going to happen here. And I want to start off by telling you a little bit about myself. I travel a lot. That's just kind of who I am right now. I travel. In the next 4 months, I'm going to 20 different cities where I'm helping churches and organizations and schools think through grace and truth and how to implement systems and ministries like that within their organization. And so I'm on this one flight a couple months ago. And I'm sitting there, and I have my Bible open, and I'm reading it, and I'm always on the aisle seat because that's just the seat you want to be in. And so I'm here on the aisle seat. This guy comes over, and he sits right next to me, and he sees me reading my Bible, and he says, "You're one of those Christians, aren't you?" And I just love questions like that. I can just tell this is going to be a fun flight. And so I just kind of, put my Bible like that, and I'm like, "Well, I don't know. I might be one of those. What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, you're one of those Christians. You're one of those Christians that thinks that everything is going downward, that we're getting worse, that people are bad, that we should be afraid. That's you, right?" And I said, "Yes, that's absolutely me." And he's like, "See, I don't believe that. I think that we have nothing to be afraid of. I think you're a fear-mongerer, and I think that people are naturally good." And I said, "Really?" I said, can I ask you some questions or give you some data? Is that okay? He said, "Sure." I said, "Okay. In the last century, from 1900 to 2000, I said, do you know how many people were murdered in the countries of China and Russia alone?" And I said, "I'm not talking about wars, I'm not talking about diseases, I'm not talking about natural causes, I'm talking about people who are straight up murdered." I said, between Russia and China in the last century, 120 million people were murdered. I said, that's not counting all the other countries in the world, that's not counting the wars. That's not counting the abortions. That's not counting the gang violence. That's not counting the human trafficking. That's not counting the slavery, okay? That's not counting any of that. I said, so excuse me if I don't have my greatest hope in humanity. I don't think people are really that good. I think people can be nice. I think people can be kind. But I told him, I said, I think the only person that can make us good is Jesus Christ alone. He is the only one. He is our answer. Right. And he said, well, besides all that, people are good. No, besides all that. I said, well, let me ask you a question. He said, okay. And I said, do you lock your door at nighttime? And he's like, well, of course. I said, why? He's like, well, I don't want anybody to come in. I said, no, people are good. People are good. Don't lock your door at nighttime. As a matter of fact, do me a favor, please, and just tonight, leave your door wide open. Put your TV out in front of your door. Okay? Put your Xbox system, your son's PlayStation. It'll be there in the morning. Put your new cell phone out there. He's like, no, people would take it. I said, no, I'm sorry. I must be mistaken here because you told me that people are good, that people wouldn't do that. And he just looked at me. He's like, well, I haven't changed my mind about people like you. You are still some kind of fearmonger who can't make it through this life. I'm just going to be honest. I love conversations like that. But I don't like it when people don't engage on an intelligent level in conversations like that. And I guess what really bothered me about that conversation is at the end of the conversation, I just really felt judged. It's just kind of like he saw me reading my Bible, and then he made a blanket judgment about me, categorized me, labeled me, put me over here, defined me, and said, that's you over here. I'm just going to, write you off, put you in the corner. You're in the penalty box in my mind. I've got you figured out, so I don't need to go deep enough with you. You ever had somebody treat you like that before? You ever had somebody just, make you feel less than? You ever meet somebody and immediately you felt like you didn't measure up in their sight? You ever think about old relationships that you've had and you just think about how this one individual has treated you and you feel like they still think about you in those terms? For some of you, that's the family that you're with, right? For some of you, that's who you live with. For others of you, you work with these people. You have worked with these people in the past. For some of you, you go to church with these people. And today, many of you have invited friends and family to come to church with you here. And we're so glad that you're here because some of you have not stepped in church in a while. And maybe the biggest reason why you haven't stepped into church in a while is because of how you've been treated in the past in church, how you've seen your friends treated, and it was a really big deal for you to get up this morning and come to church and be a part of what we're doing, and you're just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. You're waiting to see when you're going to be judged. And others of you, you've come from another church and you've come here recently and you love this place, but you're kind of putting your guard up and you have a wall up right here because you're waiting to see when you're going to be judged. If that describes you, let me tell you a couple things. Number one, you are in a great church. You're in a church with a bunch of messed up people. Okay, look at all the people around you. Even the people you don't know. Just do a quick head spin. Look at everybody. These people they've got big issues, okay? They have got big issues. But here's the great thing at this church, at West Valley Christian. We believe that it's okay not to be okay. We don't believe that it's okay to stay there. We journey together through life. And we try not to judge one another. Here's the second thing I want to tell you. If that's how you feel about church, if that's how you feel about Christians, then you're going to love what we're going to talk about today. Because in this series, we've been in Matthew chapter 6, and we're going to end today in the first few verses of Matthew chapter 7. And I want to read to you just the first few words of the first verse in Matthew chapter 7. Not all of them, but just a few of them. Because if you haven't read this before, you're going to love this. And Matthew, who was an eyewitness to everything that Jesus did and said, he was a student of Jesus and followed Jesus around. He recorded one of the greatest sermons, if not the greatest sermon that Jesus ever preached, the greatest sermon ever preached on this earth, which would later become known as the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus starts off in Matthew 7:1, just these first three words here, do not judge. Let's stop right there. If you have your Bibles, your mobile devices, you can follow along. If not, I'm going to read the verses to you. But let me read this again. Do not judge. And for some of you that don't like going to church, you haven't been to church for a while, and for some of you who are just kind of gun-shy being around a lot of Christians, you're like, amen, let's pray, let's go to the buffet, I'm in. We can end church right now. Do not judge, right? Because, good night, do we ever live in a really judgy world, right? I mean, you just go on social media. Just go on Twitter. There's a reason why Twitter's participation as opposed to Facebook or Instagram or other places has dropped in the last quarter like 17%. Because of the attitudes of people on social media right now. Even celebrities, even elected officials, even people who are athletes and star athletes. Their attitudes towards other people. And yet we look at Jesus' words here, do not judge. And we're like, I wish everybody could really just see this right now. Because our world would be better if we didn't judge. Now, what's really interesting here is that this word judge in the original language, it's a Greek term that is a legal term. It means condemnation or condemn. It means to destroy. It means to take down. It means to stomp out. And because you think about it real quick, we have to make judgments all the time, right? We have to make discernments. If you're an employer, you have to make judgments about individuals who you want to hire, who you don't want to hire, okay? If you hire a babysitter, you got to make like big judgments, right? But that's not the kind of judgment we're talking about here. That's more discernment. That has to do more with wisdom. This kind of judgment, that's a legal term that has to be found, that means guilty, that means to be crushed or taken down to destroy. This has to do with our own insecurities. Somebody we meet, or a group of people that we meet, or a community that we meet, we see them, and for some reason, it brings up our own insecurities, and I think I know why. We're going to get there in a second. But it brings up our own insecurities, and then we automatically start labeling them, categorizing them, and defining them by their mistakes, by who we assume they are, and we make sweeping judgments and assumptions about them. And yet Jesus says, do not judge. And I wonder why Jesus, says that. Because when you think about this, why do we judge? Why do you judge? I think for some of us in here, we judge because we have disdain for other people. We don't really like other people. I mean, there are some of you, you come to church and you want to serve and you're like, yes, I want to be a greeter, but you don't like people, okay? You should probably serve somewhere else. Let's just be honest. There are some of us in here, we don't like people, and so we judge. But there are others of us in here, the reason why we judge is because we're trying to hide our own sin. And we're trying to hide our own faults. And we think if I just keep, the finger pointed at them and the spotlight on them, nobody's going to see what's going on with me. But there are a few of us out here, we judge because we're self-righteous. Because we think we've arrived. And we think we're at the top of the hill and the top of the mountain, and we have been a Christian since God was a boy. That's how long we've been a Christian. And it's our job to help all these other people to come and be a Christian like me and know the Bible just like I know the Bible right here. But I think there are some of us who judge because we're jealous. We get jealous of other people. We get jealous of what they have and what we don't have. And the way that our insecurities manifest in that situation is to take them down several notches so that we make them feel as low as we feel. Others of us who are Christians, I think we just really judge because we're jealous that people who aren't like us, or people maybe who don't follow Jesus and they make choices that we wouldn't make, it looks like they're having fun and we're not. Some of the sin that some people are involved in, it looks like it's fun and we're not having fun. Like we're standing here for righteousness, and all these people look like they're having fun over there with their bad life choices or their sin or whatever. There's a pastor named Craig Rochelle who's a pastor of Life Church in Oklahoma City. He said, if you're not having fun when you sin, you're not doing it right. And there are many of us who feel like we're missing out when we see other people and what's going on with them. There are others of us, the reason why we judge is because it's really a reflection of how we feel about ourselves. We deal with depression, we deal with horrible negative thoughts about ourselves and emotions. And so when we see somebody else, we immediately transpose how we feel about ourselves onto them. I think there's a whole plethora of reasons why all of us in this room and those of us who are listening and watching after the fact, I think there's a big, list of reasons why we judge. But Jesus says, do not judge. And here's the rest of verse 1. Or you too will be judged. I always think if God could give me an infallible, inerrant, eraser, I could erase some of the things that Jesus said and my life would be easier. Because I could be more like me and less like him. And yet Jesus, man, he always messes, because in one part of his sentence, he says something, you're like, yes. And then the next part, you're like, boo. Because I don't like that. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. I mean, who likes to be judged in here, negatively? Nobody, right? And not me. I'm just like, just seeing who is going to raise their hand. But he goes on in verse 2. He says, for in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. And again, I don't like that. But I've got to ask myself a question. And if I really want to take what Jesus says seriously here, maybe you and I need to ask ourselves the same question. Here's the question. How do I want to be judged? Ask yourself that question real quick. How do I want to be judged? And however you want to be judged, maybe you should take that and apply that to other people. If I'm going to be judged, if you're going to look at me, here's the way I want to be judged. And you may or may not agree with this, but I want you to look at me and I want you to get to know me, to know my intentions. I want you to know my opinions. I want you to know what I've been through in my life. I want you to understand how things have been hard. I want you to know my personality. I want you to know some of the bad things that have happened to me and the good things that have happened to me. And I want you to understand why I made the choice that I did in that moment, right or wrong. Here's one thing I've learned in my short years in this world. I've learned that everybody, whether we believe it or not, everybody, number one, has depth. Nobody's shallow. And number two, everybody has a pretty good reason for the beliefs that they hold and the opinions that they hold. Everybody's been through different experiences. They've had different upbringings. They've been raised in different circumstances and in different contexts and in different geographies, and they're from different cultures, and they've been raised in a different system of ethics. And when it comes down to it, I'm not writing off anything that anybody does or says. I'm just saying that when it comes to the ideas and the feelings and the thoughts and the opinions and the actions of most people that I run into, I think everybody has a pretty good reason for why they do what they do when they do it. I'm not saying that reason is right or wrong. I'm just saying that really we need to ask ourselves this question: how do I want to be judged? You think about how you would want to be judged, what you would want taken into account, and then you take that and you apply it to somebody else. When they get on your nerves, when you feel like they're making choices that you wouldn't make, when they're walking on the other side of the tracks, when they're engaging in behavior that you wouldn't do, when they've made decisions that you would never make in a million years, before you put them in the penalty box or send them over to the corner to sit down with a cap on, here's what you need to do. Ask yourself, how do I want to be judged? And then take that and apply that to someone else. Because Jesus says, hey, in the same way that you judge others, God's going to judge you. And some of you are like, man, that's kind of harsh. It's nothing that Jesus really hasn't said before. He says this kind of stuff all the time. The way that you treat others, you're going to be treated this way. Remember at the end of the Lord's Prayer, when Jesus says, for if you forgive people their sins, I'm going to forgive you. But if you don't forgive people their sins, then I will not forgive you. What about when it comes to giving and tithing? When God says throughout the Bible, hey, if you give, I will bless you. If you don't, you're not going to receive that blessing. You see, there's really a boomerang type attitude when it comes to this. As a matter of fact, that's how the Message translation puts it. He says that kind of, Eugene Peterson, when he paraphrases this, he says that kind of an attitude has an attitude of a boomerang. It comes right back at you. I love how Eugene Peterson paraphrases Matthew 7:1. He says, do not pick on people, jump on their failures, or criticize their faults. Because if you do, that kind of an attitude has the attitude of a boomerang. What's really interesting, I told you I travel a lot. I'm not a fun person to travel with, by the way. I'm just owning it. I'm just being real in front of you. I got no reason to lie to you, okay? I don't. My idea of purgatory is LAX. Like if there ever was a purgatory, if God, I really think someday God's going to have me die in the middle of LAX. I just think he will. And that's going to be the ultimate irony of my life. And when my wife and I were first married, she was so stressed out. She didn't like to travel with me because, I'm TSA pre-approved now. I've got this clear thing. I want to jump in, global entry and everything. And I'm still look at it as we got to be there at a certain time to catch the bus, to go over here, to stand in line, to get ahead of all the people so we can get into Starbucks and get our drink and everything so we can be at the gate and just in time and see if there are any upgrades and everything. And I'm just like, boom, 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 let's go, 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 go. And so my wife was like, after we got married, when we went on our honeymoon, she saw this. She's like, man, I don't know if this is going to work out, Caleb. We're going to have to talk about an annulment or something. And so we get back and everything from traveling, and like we had put our car in the parking spot and everything, and it was from our honeymoon, and we get into our car, and I have my hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, and I'm like, yes, I'm back in control. Life is good again. I'm out of purgatory. I go through the parking spot cashier. I hand the lady my debit card. We pay. We drive off, and we're driving down Century Boulevard when my wife looks at me and says, I think the lady still has your debit card. And I'm like, I did the most illegal U-turn you have ever seen in your life on Century Boulevard. I mean, like I was in the movie Die Hard or something, and I'm, spinning the car around, and we're heading back down to the parking spot, and Amy's like, Caleb, you need to calm down. I said, that lady stole my debit card. And she said, you have no idea if she stole your debit card or not. I said, oh, sure I do. She has it, right? She didn't give it back. She stole it. That was pure cold-blooded debit card theft. And she's like, Caleb, you need to slow down or let me out of the car, because I don't want to die on the way to the parking spot. I'm like, no, we have to get there and enact justice. She stole my debit card. And we go through the parking spot structure, and we're in line, and we're next up. And my wife was like, Caleb, be nice. What if she's not what if she's not a believer? What if she's a Christian? I said, well, she's definitely not a Christian. Okay, Christians don't steal debit cards, okay? And we get up to the cashier line, and the lady's right here, and I'm ready to unload on her, and before I can say anything, she said, well, praise Jesus, I was just praying that you would come back. And she said, you're such a nice Christian young man. I saw all the Christian bumper stickers on the back of your car. Here's your debit card, and may the Lord richly bless your day. And I didn't say a word. I just looked at her like. And I drive away thinking I need to take all the Christian bumper stickers off my back of my car. That's number one. But that wasn't the worst part. You could imagine, if you're married, you know what I mean. The worst part was not that or the humiliation. The worst part was driving away, and I could feel my wife's glare. Husbands, have you ever just felt your wife's glare when she's you can feel the heat singeing a hole in the side of your head? And she didn't need to say anything. I just felt it, and I didn't even look at her. I just said, I'm not in a place where I want to talk about this right now. What can I say? You're right. I'm wrong. You're beautiful. I'm mostly beautiful. Ugly. And then she said, well, it seemed like you had more of an issue than she did, didn't you? And I'm like, I did a very mature response to her. I went, bleh. But she was right. It's funny. I was so eager to just let her have it in that moment. And then I saw that that judgment came back on me. That attitude came back on me. I mean, how many times does that happen in our lives? I mean, how many times do we judge people like that? And some of the times we are just openly aggressive with people. Other times we are judging by just really thinking bad thoughts about people in their heads. And then we, just act like everything's great. Other times we're indifferent. Sometimes we're passive aggressive. And I know this is hard to believe. And if you're new to church, I hope this doesn't turn you off. But some Christians actually gossip about each other. I know that's hard to believe that Christians would act like human beings, but they do. You see, we all try to deal with our insecurities in toxic ways, and one of the biggest ways is through judging. And so Jesus goes on. If the first couple verses really messed with you, just wait for these next few. That's the thing about Jesus. I mean, he really ruined my life in a good way, but when Jesus starts messing with you, he starts messing with you. He says in verse 3, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? Now let's just stop right there. Notice real quick that in my translation, and it may say the same in yours, I'm reading from the NIV. In my translation, it says, notice the speck of sawdust in your own eye when there's in your brother's eye or your sister's eye, when there's a plank in your own eye. Notice that the sawdust and the plank come from the same item, which is wood, which is a tree. And Jesus is saying, what you think is so glaring in the other person is really a speck compared to what you've got going on in your heart right now. You can't even see that because you've got a whole plank growing out of your eye right here. And really, as I said, the speck of sawdust and the plank, they come from the same item, which is a tree or wood. And you got to understand that when you see a mistake or when you see a fault, when you see sin, when you see something going on in somebody else's life, you've got to understand that you've got the same thing going on in your life and in your heart. And it's called sin. It's called missing the mark. It's called insecurity. It's called listening to your sinful nature, to your human nature over God himself. And Jesus goes on, you're like, I've had enough. But he says in verse 4, how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly enough to remove the speck from your brother's eye. In other words, I think what Jesus is saying right here is that when you see something in somebody else that really frustrates you, upsets you, when it really grinds on your last nerve, here's what Jesus is saying to do. Let that remind you of what you need to work on in you. When somebody else is just really grinding on your last nerve, and they may have treated you poorly, yes, or they may be making decisions that you would never be making in a million years. They may be operating from a different moral authority, or they may not have the credibility to say what they say. But whatever it is that they're doing that really ruffles your feathers, I guarantee you that there is sin somewhere and mistakes and things that you have not owned. And what Jesus is saying is that before you ever think about pointing out what's going on in that person, let what's going on with them remind you of what needs to change within you. You see, we call this self-awareness, and very rarely are judgy, self-righteous, jealous, self-condemning people self-aware. And Jesus is saying, you need to take the speck out of your own eye, but you know what? That's not fun. You know what we like to do? We like the magnifying glass. We like holding up the magnifying glass to other people. Because when you hold up the magnifying glass to other people, you can just really see what's going wrong with other people. You can say, well, look what that person has, all over their face and everything. And look, that individual over there, they're wearing a horrible Cowboys t-shirt. And you think about that person right there and the way that they've styled their hair and the way that they're talking to that person. You're like, I can see everybody, but you can't see me. And Jesus is saying, what we need to do is we need to put down the magnifying glass. We need to pick up the mirror. Now, most of the time, I like looking in the mirror because I see a whole lot of eye candy. And I look in the mirror, I'm just like, your wife did good, didn't she? She's a lucky lady. She married somebody who looks like a cross between Gru, Uncle Fester, and Dr. Evil. But let's just be honest. Who likes to pick up the mirror and look at what's going on in their own life? Nobody. You like to do that? You like to be confronted with your own sin and what's going on and what the bad choices you've made? No, you don't like to pick up the mirror. But Jesus says, you don't grow closer to God By holding the magnifying glass up like this. Here's the life hack. You grow closer to God by looking at yourself first. I don't know if you've ever done any acting. You know, I used to act a lot. I love acting. And so when you think about it, when you're putting on your makeup, and actors and actresses will stand in front of a mirror with all these different lights, and they put on their makeup there because these lights, you know, they expose the blemishes that you have on your face you're covering up. And then as you get closer to the mirror and closer to the lights, it exposes more and more blemishes that you didn't even see when you were standing this way. You see, that's what your relationship with God is. The closer you get with God, the more he exposes what you and I need to work on in our life. The more he refines us to create us and sculpt us more in his own image. You see, magnifying glass allows you to stay from a distance and look at people like this, okay? But when you hold up from a mirror like this, you have got to get closer. And if I'm holding up a mirror and standing in front of it, I don't have time to see what anybody else is doing because I'm looking to see what needs to change about myself. I think about this. And I think that we've got to understand that when I look at this passage, when you and I look at this passage, okay, Jesus is not just saying, don't judge people. He's not just saying, don't mind your own business, okay? He is saying that it is your responsibility and my responsibility to bear one another's burdens, to help people through life, to help them with what they're struggling with, okay? If you think that Jesus is just saying, mind your own business, you're missing the point of this message. He's not saying don't mind your own business. He's saying get your own life in order so that you're able to come around your brothers and sisters and help them. I mean, I love how he ends this in Matthew 7:12. He says, so in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. You see, it's your responsibility to get your own stuff together. That's why I would say this. I would say that dealing with my mess allows me to help you with your mess. That we do need to come alongside one another. You do need to be authentic. You do need to own your stuff. You do need to be open about what you're struggling with, okay? You do need to do that. But you cannot come alongside another person unless you deal with your own stuff. And if you think you don't have stuff to deal with, you're the biggest fool in this room. You see, it is not just your job to just make sure you and God are close. It is your job to come alongside other people and help them see Jesus. When I think about this and dealing with my mess allows me to help others with their mess, I think about my mom and my dad. You see, when I was 2, they divorced. Both of them went into same-sex relationships. In my whole childhood, I was raised in the LGBTQ community. And my mom and her partner, at a young age, took me with them to bars and campouts and pride parades and clubs. And I remember this one pride parade, there were all these Christians saying, God loves you, or God hates you, God doesn't love you. And when people from the parade would go try to talk to them, they would get sprayed with water and urine, saying, this is what Jesus thinks of you. And we may not do that today. But we kind of do that in so many ways on social media. That's right. And we do that in our conversations with other people. And by the time I got to be 16, I hated Christians because I saw them as judgmental, as awful, as individuals I would never want to have anything to do with. And if Jesus was anything like his followers, forget that. I'm out. And then I joined this Bible study as a ninja Christian, a pretend Christian, to learn how to attack the Bible, and I became a Christian. And then I had to come out to my parents, my 3 gay parents, as a Christian. And when I did, you know what the response was? They kicked me out. Because the same fear and the same judgment that they feared from other people, they just gave right back at me when I disagreed with them. But several years later, I was a pastor in Dallas, Texas, and my parents moved there separately of one another. And they started attending the church that I was preaching at. And 2 or 3 weeks before we moved out here in the summer of 2013 back to Southern California, both my mom and my dad, who were attending the church I was preaching at, gave their lives to Jesus. And I asked my parents, how in the world did that happen? And their answer shocked me. They said people treated us like people, not like projects. And we were finally involved with a group of people that we did not feel were judging us. Do you understand what is at stake when it comes to your attitude and judgment of other people? Do you understand that eternities hang in the balance? Of what you're willing to deal with in a humble approach and saying, I'm going to work on my stuff before I ever try to help you with your stuff. Dealing with my mess allows me to help others with their mess. Dealing with my insecurities and my pride and my ego and my sin allows me to be humble and gracious enough to model Jesus to a dying world. There's more at stake than what you know. And this life hack, it will actually help you to save lives.